Ever think about the people at work who, uh, you know, always get things done? The reliable ones. Are they valued, or are they maybe taken advantage of?
Mm.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into accountability and looking at whether being that go-to person, that linchpin, can actually hold you back.
Okay.
We're going to be using Shane Parrish's book, Clear Thinking, to kind of guide us,
Right.
along with some really insightful reflections from
Mm.
people, just like our listeners, mid-career professionals in forestry.
Yeah.
They're all part of the Vermont Forest Business School program.
It's really interesting how this group, after reading Parrish's book, I mean, they really started to look at their own experiences, with accountability.
Yeah.
They wrestled with this whole being a linchpin idea,
Mm.
that essential person that holds everything together.
Right, right.
And, does that actually make them more vulnerable to being taken advantage of?
Yeah, and for folks who might not be familiar with that whole linchpin thing,
Right.
it comes from Seth Godin. And he describes it as like that crucial person who just, makes stuff happen.
Makes things happen. Yeah.
They're indispensable.
Yeah.
And, the Vermont Forest Business School, FBS, it's all about helping forestry professionals, navigate these sorts of challenges.
Absolutely. And, one participant, a forestry administrator, shared some stories that were really eye-opening about always having to pick up the slack for their colleagues.
Rightly.
Like literally answering phone calls for people, like standing right next to them or having to fix other people's mistakes.
Oh, it's like they become the default problem solver.
Yeah.
But you know what really struck me?
Mm-hmm.
Was the administrator's uncertainty about whether their actions were even appreciated, or if they were just seen as like the easiest solution.
Yeah, you want to help and be a team player, right?
Of course.
But there's a fine line between that and being taken advantage of.
For sure.
A lot of us can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another participant, a forester, had this great analogy. They compared themselves to the linchpin that holds a wheel on an axle.
Okay.
Essential but easy to overlook.
Yeah.
And they made this really interesting point about distinguishing between being taken advantage of and actually being abused.
Right, right.
There's a line.
There is.
And, when it's crossed, it can lead to burnout and resentment.
Absolutely. And this connects with what another participant shared, someone who works for a trade organization.
Okay.
They were consistently exceeding expectations, but their colleagues were struggling, like with time management and meeting deadlines. And it just created this uneven workload and, possibly even some resentment.
Right.
This person was wondering if this whole accountability thing was leading to an unfair standard, for certain people.
That's a great point, yeah. So how does Shane Parrish's work on self-accountability fit into all of this?
Well, Parrish defines self-accountability as taking complete responsibility, not just for what you're good at, but also what you're not good at, and for your actions. He really emphasizes that complaining and making excuses are not helpful.
Right.
In fact, they can actually be harmful because they stop you from finding solutions.
Yeah.
He even shares a story about missing a deadline early on in his career.
Yeah.
And he was ready with all sorts of justifications.
Right.
But a colleague just stopped him and said, "It's your fault. Stop making excuses."
Wow.
That was a real turning point for him.
I bet.
It forced him to face his own defensiveness and shift his focus from being right to actually achieving what needed to be done.
So it was really about, being effective instead of just trying to be right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good reminder that sometimes we need to hear those hard truths.
Absolutely.
Even if they're not what we want to hear.
Even if they sting a little bit.
Yeah, and that ties in with Parrish's idea of the wrong side of right, where we get so caught up in being right that we lose sight of the actual goal.
He uses this poker analogy.
Oh, okay.
You can't control the cards you're dealt, only how you play them.
That's a good one.
Powerful metaphor, huh?
Yeah.
You can't change what happens, but you can control how you react.
Right.
That's really what Parrish means by self-accountability.
And it really clicked with these forestry folks.
Yeah.
I mean, they deal with limited resources, regulations, markets that are all over the place.
Right? Things they can't control.
Exactly.
That's when Parrish's advice comes in, that question you should ask yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Will doing this make things easier or harder down the road?
Makes you think strategically.
Exactly.
Forget complaining. Focus on the best decisions you can make, given what you've got to work with.
Right.
But that's going to be tough when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like that forestry administrator always picking up the slack.
Yeah, and that's where Parrish says, you got to set boundaries. Know when to say no. You can't be everything to everyone.
It's true.
He even uses an example from his own early career.
Oh.
He was so eager to please, said yes to everything, work late, weekends, the whole bit.
So what happened?
Burned himself out.
Yeah.
Resentful.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It's not about dodging responsibility.
Right.
It's about choosing where you put your energy.
Okay, so how do you strike that balance?
Parrish says, focus on your strengths, what matters most to you. Then tell your team, your boss, what those are, clearly.
Have those conversations about workload expectations, even if they're hard.
Sometimes they are.
And remembering that accountability goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Not just individuals stepping up, but the whole organization valuing that.
Leaders need to set the example, be accountable themselves,
Right.
deal with situations where someone's taking advantage.
Like that forester's analogy.
The linchpin
Needs care, not abuse.
applies to organizations, too, if they want to keep those linchpins, the people who make things happen.
So you got to create the right environment.
Respect, support, recognizing contributions, otherwise they'll lose them.
So, say you feel that tension between being accountable and being taken advantage of. What's the advice from Parrish and these forestry folks?
First step, know your worth, what you bring to the table. You don't have to say yes to everything.
Right.
Set boundaries, prioritize yourself,
Makes sense.
and communicate those boundaries clearly, respectfully.
Yeah.
Explain why, offer other ways to get things done.
Great advice.
Now, if you're in charge, pay attention to how work gets divided.
Right.
Is someone always picking up the slack? Are they getting recognized? Are there chances for them to grow?
Create that environment where accountability is valued, not exploited.
Exactly.
And remember, asking for help isn't weakness.
It's not.
A mentor, a colleague, even a therapist can give you perspective, ways to handle things. You know, we've talked about some of the downsides of accountability.
Right.
That feeling of being taken advantage of, the burnout risk. But Shane Parrish, he doesn't see self-accountability as a burden. Actually, he presents it as like a path to being empowered.
What's really interesting is that Parrish frames it as a way to take back control, no matter what's going on around you.
Okay.
He says we can't always control what happens to us, but we can always control how we react to it.
So it's a shift in perspective.
Exactly.
Instead of why me?
Yeah.
It's what can I learn from this, or how can I grow from this?
He has this great line, the obstacle is the way.
I like that.
It means seeing challenges not as setbacks, but as chances to learn and grow.
So you don't feel like a victim, you feel in charge of your own path.
Exactly. That's where self-accountability becomes a way to grow, owning your mistakes, learning from them, and making better choices going forward.
This reminds me of what that trade organization staffer said.
Oh, yeah.
They were frustrated that being accountable meant more work sometimes.
Right.
But they also realized it helped them build skills, a good reputation.
Exactly. And that's what Parrish emphasizes. It's not about getting a pat on the back from someone else. It's about that confidence you build within yourself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into accountability, it's clear, it's complicated.
It is.
There's good and bad. It's about that balance. Taking responsibility, setting boundaries, supporting your team, but also taking care of yourself.
Now, realizing accountability isn't just rules or expectations, it's how you approach things. With ownership, with that feeling of being in control.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, resentful, not sure how to handle it all,
Right.
remember, you're not the only one. A lot of us go through this, especially as our careers move forward.
There are people who can help. Mentors, colleagues you trust, even a therapist. They can help you see things more clearly, give you tools to deal with it.
The big takeaway from Parrish and from what those forestry professionals shared is that self-accountability, it's a journey. Figuring yourself out, growing, learning to play the hand you're dealt, making the best of it, tuning roadblocks into opportunities, and ultimately becoming the best you can be. Special thanks to Shane Parrish for his great insights and to those who took part in the Vermont Forest Business School for sharing their stories.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.